One for the Road, Chapter 4. The blood was still wet and slowly expanding outward across the ground of the alleyway. There was so much of it that the sheer volume made the puddles nearly black, the moon reflecting on its surface. If you focused in on that reflection, you could almost imagine it was a pond in a park somewhere, completely calm in the dead still of night. You could imagine yourself getting ready to wade in for a night swim in that dark serenity, or sharing a moonlit picnic with a lover. This was no pond, though. The windy sound of traffic on the distant freeway and the night sounds of the never-sleepers going about their business would have quickly broken that illusion, if he had any need of it. Rafael Velas had been confronted with many scenes like this, and he was able to observe it with a kind of distance, devoid of emotion, his eyes only recording. It was a vampire attack, sure, but so many details here were horrifically unique. The things that did this must have been in a state of complete bloodlust. Their handiwork was a primer in sheer brutality. This was the main outlier. He struggled to recall a feeding so violent. The pile of limbs and viscera that was once a human being lay strewn haphazardly across the black pool. It was difficult for the mind to make sense of the gory mess and assemble an image of a living person from it. But it seemed to be a man, middle-aged, probably homeless. The exposed flesh was as pale and milky as alabaster. Their feeding had been frenzied and sloppy, judging by the amount of blood they had let spill across the concrete. They must have torn off his arms and legs and drank from the bleeding stumps like a tapped keg. He shifted an arm off the torso with the broomstick he had battered the liquor store's security camera with, and observed the wounds across the neck, face, and torso. There were large, vicious bite marks across the throat and chest. The flesh had been torn away, not just pierced, and deep canyon claw marks to match. The facial features were completely indistinguishable. The skin of the face was torn away near the cranium and jaw, exposing patches of white bone, the blood beating on its surface like water on a duck's back. Everything led him to believe that there was more than one creature responsible for this atrocity. They must have been starved, each one battling to drink as much of the precious liquid as they could before the rest of their pack could completely drain their prey. This was another uncommon factor. Vampires were greedy by nature. When they did hunt in packs, it wasn't to share one victim. A shiver momentarily shattered his shield of detachment, and he felt deeply troubled. He couldn't quite put his finger on why, but he had a feeling. Almost all his prior quarries had worn man's skin, usually operating with the calculation and care of a typical serial killer. There was something else. He had come to Los Angeles after tracking just one such specimen and found this. These were the monsters at their truest form, their most natural, if you could call anything about them natural. For some reason, the elusive and cautious creature that had stalked the night for 2 centuries or more had dropped the facade. Or could it be that he had come in search of one beast in his clan and stumbled upon something much larger? A patchwork of clans, feeding in the margins of society. The uncomfortable places where most people would rather not explore. You used to be better at this, much better. Have you gotten that goddamn old? He took off his hat and ran his fingers through his salt and pepper hair. A young Raphael would have already finished his work here. This feeble old man had been in town 3 months with nothing to show for it but a pile of gore that up until hours ago had been a living man. He circled around the expanding puddle of blood, trying to will himself back into that state of calm, to see any minute detail he may have missed. He'd already gleaned at least one, although it wasn't exactly actionable. This murder happened shortly after sunset, only about an hour, and that meant the things would not have had to travel far for this meal. Their den was somewhere close by. Near the corpse's head, 10 feet away from the puddle, he crossed through a chill. The shivering came immediately. His scrotum fled into his body. Slowly taking a few steps backward, he passed into the cold spot again, denying his body's command to flee from it. It was that common phenomena, the wretched creature's lingering aura. It was a stain on reality, and the longer he stood inside it, the longer he could feel it creeping into his core. The horrid cold black of death. He stood soaking in it, deep in thought. He could only draw one conclusion, that there had been another vampire present, one who hadn't partaken in the frantic blood feast, only stood back and watched. But why? His mind conjured an image of a man throwing bread to a flock of ducks, watching them scramble over on top of each other for any crumb. Were the wild ones his pets? The revelation only added another layer of complexity and strangeness to the case. His body and mind seemed to thank him as he stepped out of the thing's aura. He looked to the walls that marked the border between the alley and a pitiful rundown apartment complex. They were splattered with blood. It was like the art of a madman. No discernible pattern, no distinguishable tracks. He moved in for a closer look and scanned the wall, searching for anything. There was one set of deep claw marks in the stucco halfway up the wall, probably from a foot as they scrambled up and over. It wasn't much, but it was a direction. He climbed over the wall, no easy task for a 60-year-old man, and, upon landing on the other side, was greeted by a sharp slap of pain across the flats of his feet. There was no trail of blood to follow, but the chill they left behind still hung about in the air. He searched for it meticulously, stepping slowly until he felt the cold lift from his bones and then continuing in its direction once he picked it back up. At the far end of the complex's parking lot, where the unnatural draft finally ended, sat a peculiar island of chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Within it there was a large rectangular steel access door set in the ground, likely placed there long before these apartments were erected and seldom used for its odd placement. Raphael could see that one corner of the door looked to be pried back. The creatures were either inside, lazing after their feeding, or out searching for more prey. Either way, there was little he could do inside their den now, other than provide them a meal or get a lay of the land. He debated for a few moments whether to press on, but he had never been much of a gambler, and with no way to tell whether the trail was leading out or in, decided to wait until morning. Even in his prime, he wouldn't have taken on a pack of them during their waking hours, especially not after what he had just seen. And then there was the fence, 10 feet or more, and daunting as hell. He would be sure to bring bolt cutters.